Good afternoon, hello and welcome on next discussion on the BRaK Festival. The discussion will be in English and will not be translated into Slovak language, as far as we have so many topics to discuss with our great guests from France, Germany and Britain. And the main topic of this discussion will be Slovak authors abroad, or Slovak literature abroad. And the main question is, what motivates the foreign publishers to publish books and authors from small languages and small countries like Slovakia? I'm Dado Nagy, I'm from the Slovak Literary Center, and Slovak Literary Center is in charge to cooperate with the foreign publishers and to help to publish Slovak authors and Slovak books and Slovak authors abroad, and it cooperates with the foreign publishers all around the world, and it financially supports the publishing of Slovak authors. We have a special grant system, Slolia, which helps the foreign publishers with publishing. It covers the costs of the translation, authors' fees, and maybe some printing costs. We are very glad that we could invite to Slovakia and to BRaK Festival our dear guests from 3 foreign publishing houses. It's Charles Groult from Edition Cambourakis from France. Isabella Barber from Coma Press from the Great Britain, from Manchester. And Janika Rütter from Surkamp Verlag. So, hello and welcome. Our 3 guests had already had some program in Bratislava. They had met some of the Slovak publishers, and the Slovak publishers presented their edition programs. They presented their authors and their books. They have listened to the lecture of Michal Talo in Slovak Literary Center about Slovak literature, and they have met quite a lot of people so far and visited some places. They are here from Thursday, and also, I would like to say that we will be very glad if you had some questions, and if you ask questions, and if you ask about things that you are interested in and that you find important and that haven't been mentioned before. So, the first question is, I would like to ask you if you could introduce a little bit your publishing house, first of all, and introduce its specifications and its profile. So, Charlotte, could you start?
Dobrý deň. Hi, everyone. So I'm an editor at Edition Cambourakis. It's a publishing house that has been created nearly 20 years ago. We publish mostly in translation. 80% of our titles are translated titles. We publish adult fiction, children's books, and graphic novels.
I will repeat it once more. You publish mostly translations.
Yes.
Yes, which is quite interesting for us.
I wasn't sure, but I checked this morning to see which first book we published, and it was a book by Hungarian author Milan Fust. So, which is quite bold for the French literary landscape. And so we publish both contemporary literature and modern classics. Our most well-known authors abroad are Laszlo Krasznahorkai, Don Carpenter, Jim Dodge, Paul Beatty. In the classics we have Gertrude Stein, that we have been retranslated. We have Nobel Prizes like Sigrid Undset, Grazia Deledda. We focus more and more on forgotten women voices, and we shed light on the works in our paperback series. And we found out that it's quite the right format for the readership. So younger people who want to read about forgotten classics. So, yeah.
And can you say what size is your publishing house on the French market, and on which countries are you translating, maybe mostly?
Which countries we have a lot of Hungarian authors.
Mention László Krásznahorkai.
László Krásznahorkai, Francine Hofer. So we publish from the American, from English, from Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, Japanese, Lithuanian, Macedonian. I think more than a dozen languages. So.
And Slovak?
Not yet.
Not yet. And what's your position in the publishing house? You are in charge of finding new titles?
And on working on the manuscripts after we have chosen them, and the last step would be to do the link between the author, the book, and then the booksellers through the sales representative. So we're also the one who present the books to the sales representative. And that's pretty much it.
Okay, thank you, Charlotte. Isabella Barber, we have met Isabella Barber in London this year, and we spoke about certain projects that might be connected with Slovak prose and Slovak literature, and especially to Bratislava. So what is the profile of your publishing house, Koma Press? It's very interesting, or might be interesting to you as well.
Hi, everyone. So Koma Press is focused on short fiction and literature in translation. So we don't really publish anything that isn't a short story. We have done one-offs, but basically it's all short story collections. So that includes single author collections and also anthologies with lots of different authors.
That's very interesting, because normally the foreign publishers don't want to publish short stories, and even Slovak publishers don't want to publish short stories. When you are an author and say, I have a short story collection, normally the publisher says, well, and don't you have a novel or anything like that? Why do you publish only short stories? Why are you concentrated on this?
It's a good question. I think one of the reasons is that we like platforming kind of like people on the periphery, marginalized voices, and that tends to lend itself very well to the short story. Short stories are often about like people on the edges of society. I think there's like a quote that's like, there's no hero of a short story usually. In novels you have heroes, but in short stories you kind of have these characters on the outside, and we really like platforming those voices. And the other thing is that we're really interested in literature and translation, and we think the short story travels really, really well. It translates really well. It's a very international form of literature. That's another reason. Also, I think everyone that works at Koma is just very passionate about the short story form and how, diverse it is and experimental, and we're just all really passionate about that as well.
And why do you think it's so that the publishers don't want to publish short stories normally? Because I think that the readers like short stories. They like these short genres. Do they not sell so well, or?
Short stories don't sell as well as novels, unfortunately. I don't know personally why that is, because I think that, I talk about this a lot, that people have such a short attention span these days, and I think the short story should lend itself really well to those people. And I think more and more people are getting into the short story, but it's just not familiar to people. So in general, the market isn't there for the short story the way it's there for the novel.
And you are in charge in the publishing house?
So we are a very, very small team. There's 6 of us. So we all do a bit of everything. So I do a bit of editing, and I also run the events for the company. We tend to... So one of our missions, as well as kind of platforming the short story and showing off how amazing it can be, is to try and make the creative industry more accessible. So we also run events for writers, translators, and and publishers, aspiring publishers in the north, because we're actually based in Manchester, and in the UK the publishing industry is really heavily focused in London and the southeast, and that's something that we really want to change. So that's what we try and do through our events, is kind of bring creative careers to people outside of London.
And you have one very specific project. Our great translator into English, Julia Sherwood, who I'd like to welcome here, told us that, well, there is a specific publishing house, Comma Press, and they have got these great series of collection of short stories from the towns from the world. So, and last year there was published a book of short stories. It was called Book from Prague.
Yeah, the Book of Prague, yeah.
The Book of Prague.
So this series is called our Reading the City series, and we've done almost 30 now. I think by the time we get to the end of this year, it will be 30 cities.
Which was the first one?
No, Manchester wasn't. Actually, Manchester is coming out this year. I don't know which the first one was. It was actually inspired by a book of Manchester that was published years and years ago, but not by us. So this kind of set the ball rolling. But it's basically 10 stories from 10 authors from a specific city. And we're very keen for it to be kind of a different way into the city for people. So we don't want it to be written by tourists. We want it to be written by people who have a real familiarity with the city. They know it really well, either someone from there or people who have lived there a really, really long time. And it's 10 authors. We use 10 translators as well. And we really like this series because I think a lot of the way the industry works in the UK and maybe abroad as well is the way we draw readers in is with kind of an author's name. So people see the author's name and they think, oh, I want to buy that book by this author. But for us, we are using the curiosity or familiarity with a city to draw people in to read stories and read things from authors who they may not read before. So someone might think, oh, I want to learn more about Bratislava, so they may read a book of Bratislava, which is the project that me and Dado have been talking about. And then they might come across the type of stories that they never would have read, or from authors they never would have read otherwise. So, yeah. And
do some of the people use this collection of short stories as a tourist guide or something?
Yeah, definitely. I think, I mean, they're all fiction, so it's all short fiction, but people do tell us that they use them kind of like as a little bit of a guide to the city to kind of familiarize themselves with the culture a bit. I think the Book of Tokyo is one of our best-selling books of all time, and it's our best-selling city book, obviously. And a lot of people, I think, really, it's a culture that's not that familiar to us in the UK. So people, if they're going to travel there, they kind of want a sense of what the city's about. And another thing is, in these books, we try and keep a lot of we try and talk about different parts of the city, different cultural aspects, different physically different districts of the city. So I think you get a good overview of it through these books. So that's why people also want to use them as travel books.
Okay, thank you. Surkamp is maybe the best known from all of these Surkamp Verlag from Germany. So can you present your publishing house?
Yes, of course. I'm an editor at the International Literature Department at Surkamp. Surkamp was founded shortly after the war by Peter Surkamp, and its main basis is publishing German literature, like by Bertolt Brecht and Hermann Hesse and all these old guys. And we always had a strong internationalist focusing on Latin American literature. And then after the end of the 90s, or starting with the end of the 90s, Katharina Rabe was like developing this Eastern European literature department within the International Literature Department. And so she discovered authors from Hungary, from Ukraine, from Russia also, which is now, of course, a different topic, and from Poland. And it's quite unique for the German market that a publishing house is focusing on the so-called Eastern European languages.
And you are in charge for these Eastern European languages and finding new titles?
Yes, so she's focusing mostly on Ukraine and Hungary and so, and I'm traveling a little bit through the Balkans, and I'm very happy to be here. Last week I was in Prague, and so there's a lot to discover for the moment.
And now another question is, what is the situation like with the translations on your market? Because as Charlotte said, well, 80% of their production are translations of their publishing house. But for example, I know that in the UK they publish only 3% from the market in general are translations. So can you say something more about your market?
I looked it up yesterday, the figures for 22, and the German book market publishes like 15% of translations, and 60% of the languages is translated from the English or the American, and then comes French and Spanish and Italian and so, and all the other languages then share like 5% or so. So it's difficult for the smaller languages to establish themselves on the German book market.
Yes, so unfortunately, the UK is famously unreceptive to translated work, which obviously doesn't please us very much at Comma Press. Yeah, so the figure that's often quoted is that 3% of the book market in the UK is translated literature. I think I was actually reading about it, and it's slightly higher now. It's more around 5.5%, which is a good thing. It means that, you know, the appetite is growing stronger for translated literature. But still, I think we just have a problem making our readership interested in it. It's probably something to do with the fact that English is such a dominant language, so people don't really have the desire to read outside of it. We do have kind of trends in the UK. Like a few years ago, there was a trend for like Scandi noir crime fiction, and then also Icelandic literature kind of had a bit of a moment a few years ago, but it kind of operates in these trends as opposed to a kind of growing appetite for translated fiction. But I do think that is changing, but very slowly and, yeah, not as quickly as we'd like.
I think for us it's similar to Germany. French people read quite a lot of translated titles, but it's the same. There are trends. I think American literature is highly popular, like in a lot of other countries. But Japanese literature a lot as well, for example, in France. And one thing I would like to add is, apart from the fact that readers might be attracted to literature in translation, the huge obstacle can be the price of, the cost of translating a title. And for us, we wouldn't do as much as translated as we do, as much as translations as we do, is if we didn't have the support of either countries or from France, because there's you can ask for a translation grant for foreign titles in France, so you can have 40 to 60% of the cost of translation covered. And if there wasn't that, we wouldn't do as much as translations, because we need to know that we will reach the point like quite quickly, and not wait for 2,000 titles to be sold to have a little bit of money.
So the translation grants decide much in your countries as well.
Yeah, for us, we can't do a book unless we have the translation grants. Like, we have done it one-off, self-funded, but in general, the translation grants are hugely important. And as well as our interest in a city or a country, it's very much about where we can get the funding for that translation, because it's so expensive. And we are quite lucky that as a small publishing house, because everyone does a bit of everything, we do have the time to kind of put in these funding applications. So we're lucky with that. But I think another problem in the UK is that the larger publishing houses just don't have someone to do that. And that's also kind of a barrier to translated fiction being published in the UK.
Are some countries which are more generous than the others with their translation grants, and they're doing maybe most of all for their books from their language being published into your languages?
I'm not a real expert on these translation fundings. I know that the colleagues which acquire titles from Norway, so they are quite satisfied with the NORLA support and stuff like this. But we are always very happy if we can get some translation funding, but we don't rely on this. So if we decide for a title, it's no matter what's going to happen, because sometimes you don't even know when you acquire a title if you will get it. And so this is not the deciding point for us, but it gets more and more important because we also have to raise the book prices since the inflation started and stuff like this. And books in translation, as you said, are getting very expensive now in Germany. So it's very good if the publishing house can get some translation funding.
And now a very important question. So you said when we decide that we want to publish, then no matter whether it's been founded or not, whether we will get a grant or not, we'll go for it. So what are the basic criteria for you that you decide that we want to publish a title from, I don't know, Hungary, Poland, Slovakia, Romania, and so on and so on?
Well, I think I'm very lucky because I'm in a small publishing house which relies on a bigger publishing house, but still the editorial team is small. So I would say it's very subjective. Like we know it would be harder to have the book read if it's in translation. So if we decide on a title we want, like in French we say un coup de cœur, like it's you're completely convinced, you're 100% convinced with your heart that you want this book to be read. So
and what is it? Is it a topic or is it?
For me, it's more like the
a
voice.
Literary value, the voice.
It's the voice.
Theme.
Like if it's original, if I'm just taken, and it's rare. So when you find it, I think you know it quite quickly. Sometimes you're unsure, and sometimes you don't know, because most of the times I have to read the abstracts in English, so I have to imagine the book in French. So it's harder, but yeah, it's highly subjective.
And how do you decide? Are you, for example, suggested? Do you have some books that are suggested by some literary agent? Or agencies, or maybe a translator, and then it's up to you to persuade your publisher that this is the right book. We definitely want to do this. Yeah,
it's either through literary agents, through translators. We rely mostly on translators, and the good thing is to develop like good relationship with translators. Like outside of what we do, I like to know what they read, like not just I like to know what they read in French literature, in American literature, just to know their tastes, so that I can, like a friend basically. And
you
and
asked
also,
me yesterday who is my favorite author,
yeah,
and then you made your mind. Oh yes.
But and last thing, especially for like the languages that are not that much translated, I look a lot at what other foreign publishers that I really like do. So that's a good, like, and especially it's because we don't have the same, like we don't focus on the same things. So sometimes I just go back to like what this really good American publisher, indie publisher did 10 years ago, and that might be a title we just, forgot, and that could be a good way to look at it. And so that you can find titles like, important titles that have been just forgotten, and yeah.
And let's be even more specific. What will made you to accept a title from Slovakia, maybe? Small country, small language.
Because I love the voice, I love the writing style, I love the story. Obviously the story should be also, I should would like to know what is going to happen to the character, and I should care about the character. And after that, I don't have like other criteria.
Isabella?
Yeah, I mean, so like I said, for us, it really depends on the funding, if we can get the funding for somewhere. But I think, so we have a lot of series, which is where our translated literature fits into what we publish. So we have the Reading the City series that I spoke about. We also have the Plus 100 series, which is a kind of a science fiction series, and we ask authors, it's the same, it's usually 10 authors, but you know, it varies, to imagine their country 100 years after a huge national event. So for example, the Egypt Plus 100 is set 100 years after the revolution in Tahrir Square, or the Book of Gaza is set, Palestine Plus 100 is set 100 years after the Nakba. So basically we, so translated literature fits into these series really well for us. And I think for us, it's about, okay, what country or what city do we think might work really well with that? So, I mean, with the Plus 100 series, if one of us has a suggestion about, you know, a big event that happened in a certain country, then we might then go and pursue that, go and pursue the funding for that, because we think it's a story that needs to be told. I mean, I'm really lucky that our team is so small, and like our CEO is so receptive to the suggestions we have. So that's also another way that things get decided. You know, if we have an idea, he'll often just say, yeah, see if you can get the funding, run with it, which is very nice for us. So, yeah.
So for us, it's basically like Charlotte said, so we rely heavily on the translators, because many publishing houses in smaller countries did not have foreign rights departments also. So the translators are always like the most important sensorium we can rely on. But of course we meet with agents, we go to book fairs, we go to fellowships and try to mingle and meet with people. And then we read, sometimes just based on the sample translation, sometimes we can read the languages. And then in the beginning, there's always the personal enthusiasm or interest for the voice or for the story or for the person of the author. And then you try to convince the rest of the house. And then if this goes through, then we are going to publish the book. So.
And how about Slovakia, or maybe Slovak literature or the Czech literature? I'd like to welcome here Mirko Krečo, translator from Czech and Slovak into German. So you think it might be difficult to persuade the publisher, so this is very interesting, and I find it so much interesting that we should publish it from Slovak prose or whatever?
No, so Zukamp is a very open house to smaller languages, so it's not a huge problem, but sometimes it just takes time to convince people or so. And for the Czech literature, they are in the lucky position that they're going to be guest of honor in Frankfurt in 26, so this is always a good opportunity to establish new authors within your program. So we published the works by Bohumil Hrabal in the past and Joachim Topol, but of course we are now looking for younger authors and also from Slovakia.
Okay, and as I said, you have listened to the lecture about contemporary Slovak literature, about the themes, about the tendencies, and you have met yesterday Slovak publishers who were presenting their portfolio. Did you find anything interesting, or did you find that, for example, this is something that might interest our readers, or that's worth to be translated and published in French, English, or German? Isabella? Okay.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, there was a lot that I thought sounded really interesting, but for comma, it's got to be short stories. So I was kind of, for us, I would be limited by that. I think almost all the short story collections I did hear about, I was really interested in. I think Richard Pupala is still one that stands out to me. I think he sounds like a very comma author. I was reading an extract yesterday. I can't remember which story it's from, but I was reading an extract of his work, and I thought that sounded really great. But I'm really interested in the whole literary scene here. I think we heard about so many titles, and so many of them I thought, oh yeah, I want to read that. So even though Comma can't publish, I mean, some of them are published in English already, but even though Comma can't publish them all in English, I would like to read some of the novels in English. So hopefully someone else does it.
Charlotte?
Yeah, it's the same. Honestly, like we've heard about a lot of novels, and I would say at least I've heard about at least 8 or 9 novels I would really like to have an abstract to read from. So yeah, there were a lot of titles that I thought were interesting.
Do you remember some of them, or maybe the topics that you think that these might be interesting?
I don't know if I would like to share names, because I don't want to, give hopes and then, what I can tell is that I was surprised, because I was interested by very different kinds of novels. It could have been autofiction, novels with a little bit of, fantasy and folklore, fantasy novels, because all of them sounded very literary and very original, and this is what I'm looking for from the beginning. So yes, I'm hopeful we can work soon with more with Slovak literature.
Janika?
Yeah, it's the same for us. So yesterday I wrote it down, pages and pages of names and titles. So, but now the work starts. So now we have to get the sample translations and to get a known impression and to get familiar with the voices and the stories. But the pitches were great, and they just made us very intrigued. I think.
And do you think that there were some topics that were sort of original, or that that might be so specific, for example, for this region?
Yeah, I think in the presentation yesterday by Michael, the last point, the literature from the periphery, I think this is something very specific, which might be very interesting for German readers, because, of course, the search of yourself or identity or stuff like this, I think the periphery is a rich scene to be discovered. The approach is very modern in some cases, I think.
And does it play a role when you publish a book if the author from a country, if the author comes to your country and does some readings and appears on literary festivals and discusses with the readers and does some signings and things like that?
So you mean after we've published their work? Yeah, I mean, we love to have the authors obviously involved in festivals and readings and such, and if we can get them over or for a launch, we will do that. Again, we're as a small publishing house, we are limited by funding, but yeah, we'd love to have the authors actually come to the events. Sometimes it's not possible. We publish a lot of literature by people who are exiled or people who maybe can't have their real names shared. So it's not always possible to bring those people over. So sometimes we'll do events that are kind of hybrid or online events. Or sometimes, because we publish anthologies, sometimes we'll just have the editor come to the events instead if the authors aren't available. But we love to have the authors there if we can. Even if it's for an international collection, we still try our best to bring them.
So you're doing, for example, with these books of collection of short stories of the cities, with this city series, in Manchester or in the town, or like in Tokyo or in Berlin?
Our launches are in Manchester or in London or in UK cities. Sometimes we'll have multiple. I think for the Book of Beijing we had one in Manchester and one in London. I think it was London. It may have been Leeds. I can't remember. But yeah, so we will often do multiple, especially if we can get them into like festivals and stuff. That's another way to do it.
we're always happy if an author is willing to travel. So we think it's a great opportunity for the readers to meet with them directly and to have the readings and stuff like this. And also, if we can do some small online interviews or so, this is always very helpful in these times. And we have a social media department, and they think, how can we present them on Instagram and stuff like this? So this becomes more and more important for us. And this is a great advantage of European authors because it's much easier to invite them. And
for us, it's pretty much the same, but we won't do like book launch on our own with a bookseller, especially for foreign authors. We found out that it's better to work in advance with festivals, so that the authors can appear in panels with authors that are maybe more well-known by French readers, so that they will be the readers that would come to the event that are especially interested by the foreign author, and also the others. So, because we wouldn't like to have the author coming to Paris and there's like 3 people in the room. It would be awful. So I mean, it's okay if it's a Parisian author, but.
And one very specific thing sometimes happened that maybe a Slovak author phones to us and he says, I've got my great novel, I have translated it to English, German, French myself, or I found a translator and he translated it, and I would recommend me some publishing house and I will send it there myself and I will offer it myself. It's so great that I'm sure that they will be absolutely eager to publish it. So does it work?
I mean, we would never say no, especially if it comes from somebody we know. Like, for example, maybe if you said to us, like, I've been in contact with this author and I think it's great and worth a read. Like, if it's somebody we know, we will try our best to read it. And obviously it does help to have a translation already, because that would help us to decide. I mean, a lot of our translated work is commissioned, but if it's not, then then of course it's good to have a translation so we know whether we want to translate it. But we don't have anyone to sit and go through manuscripts that people have sent us. Like, we just don't have that aspect to our publishing house. We often will find readers, we'll find authors either through what we're reading ourselves or through word of mouth, through the translators. So I'm not saying no, it wouldn't work, because we're happy to read anything if we can, but I wouldn't say that's the main way. Well, it's definitely not the main way that authors will get into our books, foreign authors or domestic authors.
Yeah, I think it's the same for us. Of course, we wouldn't say no, but I think it's maybe the better or more promising way if you have an agent, or if you have people who can recommend the title also, or the book, because we get a lot of manuscripts and so they pile on the tables, and so it's always good if you have someone who can, or someone besides from the author who you can talk to with about the book.
Yeah, it's the same.
It's the same. Because there are some authors who are just sending their manuscripts to dozens of publishing houses, and then and they think that, well, it might work somewhere. Like,
I mean, it might work. It's like it's how we publish French fiction. I mean, I publish French fiction that I receive as a manuscript, but it's just that it takes me way more time to go into the manuscript we receive, and so the foreign author, I mean, it might be just easier to go through an agent, a translator, someone from an institution like you.
So for the German literature, we have a person at Surkamp who reads all these manuscripts who come from German authors, which are unknown yet, and it's like 50 to 70 manuscripts a week that reach us this way. So you can imagine that it takes some time. And
50 to 70 manuscripts a week. Okay, so we have the last 10 minutes, so it's good time for your questions. If you have anything that would you like to ask. Are there any questions? Is there anything that you are interested in? So I will ask one question to all of you. What is your favorite author? Who is your favorite author? Charlotte asked me this question yesterday, and I have a prepared answer, but then I was thinking about the other ones for maybe other half an hour.
I mean, for me, I read, obviously I do read novels, but I read mostly short fiction. And I would say that Raymond Carver is my favorite. I mean, I love Catherine Mansfield as well, but for me, Raymond Carver's short stories, they're kind of what put me onto short stories. And I just was so amazed when I read his work. So if I had to choose one, that's who I would choose.
Alice Munro. Okay, Janika?
That's a difficult question. So I don't have a favorite author any longer, and I just have favorite books for the moment of the time or so. And I think the last, or my favorite book at the moment is one of a Russian anti-war feminist, and we just published it. And she's a great poet and activist, and it's very touching to read her confrontation with herself. And she was active in anti-war activism for 10 years, and she asked herself, what did we do wrong? And so this is a very impressive read that's in my mind at the moment.
And yeah, it's the same for me. When I think about my favorite authors, they're the ones, who were the first to got me into real literature, so I feel like I have to pay back. So the first ones were maybe the Portuguese author António Lobo Antunes. That was a huge shock. Elfriede Jelinek also was an enormous shock. And I could talk about one book I've just read a couple of weeks ago, and so she's not my favorite author because I've just read this one book, but I think she's fantastic. Her name is Mercè Rodoreda. She's a Catalan writer, and she's a kind of modern classic, and she's really worth to discover.
Okay, this is by the way my most favorite part of any discussion, like this embarrassing. Oh, are there any questions? And I'm imagining myself sitting in the audience and saying, well, do I have anything to ask? But anyway, if you like to ask anything,
so I'm very curious because you mentioned this Russian author, but there are more Russian authors which oppose Putin's regime. So I'm very curious about the name about the name of the author you were just speaking about.
Her name is Daria Serenko. She's a young Russian woman. She's now living in Georgia in exile because she was hunted by Russian fascists and stuff like this. So.
I can add one more question. A couple of weeks ago, I was talking to a journalist from the Netherlands, and he said he's currently writing a book about current affairs in Slovakia. And one of the things he said that, because I asked him who would read such a book about Slovakia, and he said that because of what's happening, because of the geopolitical current affairs developments, that people are starting to be more and more interested in Slovakia. Would you maybe say that could some be translated even to the market with books, that people are starting to be more and more interested in Slovakia and these Eastern European countries, smaller countries?
I mean, I definitely think that we do see this in the British market, that if a country is in the news, then interest for its literature really follows. So we've seen this with Ukraine, and we've also seen it with Palestinian literature. So I definitely think that, I mean, I don't want to say it's a way for countries to become relevant, because you obviously don't want terrible things to happen in your country, but the kind of countries being in the news, it really does spark interest for the UK market in these countries. Yeah, so I definitely think we could see that with Slovakia.
I remember, by the way, one discussion like this in Cambridge, our meeting with some literary agents, some British literary agents, and when I asked this question, what would help to put our literature somehow in the interest of the British publishing houses, she said, well, I think that a war might help. If there will be a war in your country, that will a little bit rise in interest. So last 5 minutes. Are there any other questions? Okay, so if there are no other questions, so I will ask my final question. You are right now, it's the third day in Bratislava. So what are your general impressions from visiting our country? You are here for the first time, I think.
I want to stay.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely want to come back and just like, I've already been speaking to my partner and say like, we should go to Bratislava for a weekend, you know? I think it's a really nice city, and like we've been given such a warm welcome from everyone. Everyone is so nice, and I just think...
There's a direct line from Manchester to
Yeah,
Bratislava.
exactly. There's direct flights from Manchester to Bratislava, which I didn't know until I came here. So it's really great for us. We can definitely come back for a weekend. I think it's a great city.
Charlotte?
Yeah, the same. And actually, I would be very curious to discover the mountains, the Tatras, and more the countryside, because we've been talking about that, but also a lot of books that we have been presented talk about those places. And yeah, I would be very, very curious to come back.
Thank you very much for coming to Slovakia, for coming to the festival, and looking forward to the next projects from the Slovak literature. So thank you very much to Charlotte Groth, Isabella Barber, and Janika Ritter, and thank you very much to you.